And since we are not that far, we are actually a few more already. I would ask you, like every one of you, to give a very loud applause to Vladi.
By the way, so do you need that paper here?
So, when partners can't agree, their dealings come to naught, and trouble is the labor's only fruit. Once, crawfish, swan, and pike set out to pull a loaded car, and altogether settled in the traces. They pulled with all they might, but still the cart refused to budge. The load, it seemed, was not too much for them. Yet crawfish scrambled backwards, swan straight up skywards, and pike pulled toward the sea. Whose guilt is here and who is right is not for us to say. But anyway, the cart's still there today. So that's one famous fable from Ivan Krylov. It's called Crawfish, Swan and Pike, or in Russian, Лебедь, Рак и Щука. And it's like really famous, and it has a different interpretations and what the author tried to tell with it. And I really like my own, that pretty good suits to the topic of today, and it's basically ambiguity. So you can describe ambiguity as an uncertainty of meaning, and just think about terms like beauty, security, safety. So that's just some terms, and everybody of us interpret it differently. They are subjective. So, and actually, there is an important part to understand that subjective always involves interpretation. So, and if you talk about the difference between being objective and subjective, that objective is basically the observation of facts. So, moon is big, is a fact. No, it's an interpretation. It's a subjective interpretation. But if you say, well, the Earth has only one moon, that's a fact. Then it's an objective. That's an observation. And actually, that's like a butterfly here, if you can see it. And butterflies are wonderful, beautiful creatures, aren't they? There is actually a kind of phobia. It's called lepidopterophobia, and it describes the fear of butterflies. So, like even if for most of us the butterflies are beautiful creatures, for these people they will disagree with you completely. And imagine if you give the task like to prepare some, like a fancy decoration with butterflies for such a person, what kind of outcome you would expect? So would it be like a vampire butterflies or something like this? So basically, that's another example of things that then different people can interpret in a different way. If we talk about the professional part of this ambiguity, so let's say you got a task to make the website more intuitive to use. So it's like completely unclear what is meant by this, and I mean that in real life you probably will not get the request like this, but maybe something more detailed, like make the navigation between hotel pages more intuitive to use. So it's kind of more defined, but still, what the hell does the more intuitive here means? I mean that we can ask our UX people to explain, and maybe they have some better understanding, but for us it's like not clear. And if you think about the person you assigned the task to, it could be like a blind person, and for him this more intuitive would be something totally different because he only uses screen readers all the time. And some old lady with a totally different life experience will have a totally different interpretation. So the more intuitive will be different as well. And even if you think about like two persons with the same background, more or less like life experience, even some minor experiences in their lives may affect and change this interpretation. So, and actually the funny thing that there is a good and ancient technique known as a quantification. So, and I'm kind of amazed that even if we know that such a thing exists, we don't use them at all nowadays. We use it for some obvious things like let's measure the speed of the car, right? So everybody of you can think of like it's an easy task to do, but the more intuitive to use. What does that mean? So how we can quantify it? It's something different. And even if you think that some terms like really hard to quantify, I will prove that that's basically wrong. And everything can be quantified, like literally everything. And a good example, I think, for this would be if we talk about, let's say, some more like pathetic terms like love, you know, or as I provided example in the beginning, like beauty. So that's a really complex thing, and if you try to describe the quantification and assign like some numbers to these terms, it's like really tough task. But there is another technique, also pretty old, and if you're engineer, you know it for sure. It's like pretty popular, called decomposition. So in decomposition, you can define it as a way to to break a system on a smaller parts that are much easier to understand or like program or whatever. And decomposition is used also in different projects. So if you're a software engineer, you use it like on a daily basis for writing functions. Let's say in some different professions, you can also use a decomposition. Like even if you try to explain something to your kid, let's say, you always try to break this complex term to something that is much more easier to understand. And I will show you a kind of example how you can decompose such a complex thing and like a bit pathetic as a love, right? So if you think about it, love is a really driving force of the human history. For example, we had a guy, the king in Russia. I mean, not the current one, but the one who was living like for 1,000 years ago, Vladimir the Great.
Coincidence?
And actually, the whole history of Russia, like the main major thing was a Christianization of Russia, and he made it just because of the marriage with the Queen Anne. It could be a political thing, right? But who knows? So the consequences are pretty dominant here. Like a lot of people can tell you, like I would do anything for love. I would go through hell for love. After the marriage, they do it literally, and that's another thing. It's recorded, right?
I will not show you right.
Okay, so darling, if you watching it, that was a joke. Okay. Actually, this concept of decomposition of love is not new. There were some attempts to do it, and there was a pretty famous book called The 5 Love Languages. And the idea behind is the people speak just the different languages of love. So one person, love means the physical interactions, like a touch or something, or if you give a gift, that could be a love for somebody. But for someone else, it could mean that if you would have a verbal appreciation, or maybe if you just do would like to get some help. So it could be understood as a love. And if you have these conversations, oh, you don't love me anymore. No, I do. And actually both of the parts are right, because they do, but they have their own interpretation of love. And there was like another way to describe love, like 50, from the period from 52, 57, Anno Domini, as New Testament, Corinthians, and you see that also kind of the way to decompose. So love suffers long and is kind, love doesn't envy, and basically that's just the different aspects of love. And actually, when I learned all this quantification thing, I met one of the most significant person in the like area of learning quantification, Tom Gill. So, and he showed me the way how he described this for the students. So basically, he asked the class to decompose the love for different parts. So, what does it mean, love? You can really define the different aspects of love here. So when you think, okay, what is love for me? Is it like a trust part of love, or is it respect? And it may be different, but at the end you can collect some different parts here. And then you see that, well, trust is still ambiguous, right? So what does it mean, trust? You go deeper. So then you ask, what is the trust? And you may think about like broken agreements, late appointments, and like all this stuff. So you just going deeper and you defining what does it mean. And at some point you have a more or less clear understanding of the term. So let's say truthfulness in this case. And at some point you can define a scale to measure it. So in this case it could be defined as an average lies per month, something. Well, here really need to think about finding the correct way to measure. And the easiest way actually to find a scale here is, surprise, just Google it. Write like, I don't know, truthfulness metric or something, and you will get 10,000 different ideas how to measure truthfulness in this case. And almost like for every term you can find some attempts to quantify them. Of course, it could be that you have something really exotic and you need to think about it, but you can get a lot of ideas just like from doing some research in the internet. And also be aware of like uncertainty principle. Right? So, I mean, that's a term from quantum mechanics, or like maybe more correct would be to use the term observe effect. When you observe something, it affects the measure, basically. And I recently heard a joke about like Volkswagen. So basically, if you just measure emission of a Volkswagen diesel car, they just become normal. So it's kind of a good illustration. So also you need to measure the value in the past. If you don't, then maybe you think, okay, so what is like the average lies per month should be considered as a good? And well, maybe 3. And then reality shows that like in your marriage is like 100 or something, you know. And that means that this normalization weren't done before, and you need to adjust it. And of course, it doesn't make sense just to measure things for fun. I mean, that you would, but what should you? And normally, if you measure something, you have a kind of a goal. So it could be either to maintain the level, or more regularly just to develop it to some better value. And of course, you need to adjust, because let's imagine that you have a conversation with your partner, and you're crazy enough, like just to apply this concept to your relationship, and maybe you have a competition, just like who has a better score of love, something like this. And then maybe your partner tells you, okay, so that wasn't lie, the intention was good, and that's why basically I wouldn't consider it as something that affects the truthfulness. Then you need to remove even like this level of ambiguity and tell, okay, it's not just average lies per month, but black lies per month. And then no excuses anymore, right? Lie is lie. So, that's very important to understand here, that that's like not something like an ultimate definition of love that you can apply to everything. That's our definition of love that we define for ourselves, for our group. Why is it important? Because like it doesn't matter if you agree with it or not. So your partner may have a totally different definition, but when you talk about it, then you understand that, well, he or she mean something different by love here in this case. And for us as like professionals, if we think about some task and we talk to each other, we talk about, like, let's say, our friendliness. Come on, so what does it mean for you? What does it mean for me? It could be also interpreted in a different way. So I think that it's really important to understand and to talk about such things just for the sake of working in a more meaningful way and to reduce this like communication cycles. Now talking about more like a practical approach, how you can apply this concept. There is a so-called language, which is language for planning. So, and basically it's just like a concept of the language of a formal description, some ambitions that you would like to quantify, and also like setting goals and the way to measure it. So the idea is pretty easy. You just need to like define some metric here or give a name to the metric. So in this case it's called tag here. And what we're trying to quantify, that's a performance, total index page and page load time. So you have a kind of a complete specification. And then there is an ambition or so-called bullshit level. So basically, if somebody tells you, well, we need to make our website more secure, or our website need to be like faster or something like this, you just agree, you just write it down for yourself. So like fast time to load the total index web page. I mean that it's more concrete, but still the ambiguity is still there. So you just write this ambition, and then you really need to think deeply. What does it mean exactly? And you need to define a scale. So in this case, it would be milliseconds of elapsed time between clicking on the hotel index page link and the above default content rendered or explicitly painted completely on the base range of the user platform. So here, the ambiguity level is totally different, and it's much more easy to get the right intention. So, and if you ask, okay, what is the base range of the user platform needs, then you actually can see it as a defined below, and that's an exact explanation what we mean by the platform. So there's a processor, there's like operating system, a browser, and also like the details like at least 50% of system RAM and 70% of system CPU capacity free. So you really need to be detailed here, because the different let's say user platform may behave differently, and it can affect your test. So then you also describe a measure, actually how you measure it, and in this case it's like stopwatch testing performed on 1000 test instances, and you will describe the details here. And the goal part is a critical, so it's kind of the minimum that you need to reach in order to think about the problem solved. So in this case, we can say that our goal is 3,700 milliseconds for 98% of tests. Of course, you can define additionally a stretch, which could be something like on top that you don't necessarily need to achieve, but if you achieve, it brings a lot of value as well. And also, you can define like a wish, no more than 100 milliseconds for all tests. Why do we need it? And why is, like in this example, 100 milliseconds and not one? So if your goal actually, like the high level goal is to provide like instant feedback for the user. I don't know like exact numbers, but most likely if there's like a difference between 50 or 100 can be not so visible for the user. So it doesn't make sense to like optimize for 1 millisecond if we can do it just like if 2 is good enough and there's no additional cost. And so why is it important still to define it? Because if the new technology will be created, like let's say in 1 month, we still have this wish in our documentation, and we can remember all the wishes of this regarding this task, so we can optimize and deliver great value even without like a big cost from our side. The one way to use that language, there is a tool called needsandneeds.com. Actually, that's like a pretty complex tool. It consists of the different modules, and it created in order to write specifications, define different terms, or find a like more optimal solution. So I learned this tool on an example of choosing the best possible solution. So you can think about it as like a decision-making system. And here you see an example of the defining the value decision table. And in this particular example, we have something as a productivity of engineers that we would like to optimize. So we have a bullshit level here, so deliver code without bugs on a daily basis, basically. And we have a scale that we defined really precise. I will show you like a bit more details afterward. And also we have a status, the current status, with like some delta here that maybe like can affected by some third-party factors or something. And also here is a wish where the place where we would like to be. And if we go deeper into the scale, you see that here we also use this decomposition principle. We define every ambiguous part here, and we define it explicitly. What do we mean exactly by, let's say, delivered, or what do we mean by bug-free? And bug-free, for example, we can think about as like acceptable quality level for beta testing or for customers, or even define that it's like proven completely bug-free, and we mark this as impossible. So there is no way to actually achieve this level. And after you describe your problem and your set of solutions and the cost, so in this case, like cost would be like a days in sprint, you get a so-called value decision table where you have like different ideas and how they possibly can affect your solution and how much will it cost. In this case, you also get like you have a risk assessment, so you define what kind of competence or what kind of the authority level we have for one of the solutions. So let's say you have something like about research by a big company who put a lot of effort and who have proven that this kind of method will work the best for the solution, and you can think about the huge level of authority in this case, if that was proven many times before. But if, like, when we discussed this particular example with Tom, I said, okay, so could we consider like a certification, doing online courses beneficial? Can it like really affect the productivity level? So that was my idea, and in this case, that was I was a kind of a source of truth, and like the way how it sounds, like this authority in this case is not so high, because it's just like my guess. And actually, in this case, the level of risk is pretty high. But this level of risk will also be considered and automatically calculated in this value decision table. I mean, that's just like the really simple, the easiest way to define the table is basically the value, cost, and two ideas to solve. Of course, you can define it like in a more complex way. The good thing that at the end you also get like a nice overview of the different solution, the comparison of the solution. So if you have the problem, how you can define like what is the solution works the best for you. I think that it's one of the best tools that exists nowadays, just like for the considering different approaches. And at the end you get a ratio between like the value delivered and cost of the solution. So another thing is that if you try to quantify everything, it costs you a lot of time. And just think about like quantifying something really low-level task implementation details. So is it good? I mean that maybe even implementation, your guess of implementation is wrong here. So maybe you don't need like this particular implementation, and maybe like the something to be quantified and defined on the middle level would be much more beneficial. But if you think about like something really high level, like on a mission level, it's really hard to get a chain between this mission and how it led to your actual task. So I mean that we can, of course, like decompose our company values, or let's say like a company vision, quantify it and go really hard. And it will be a really complex task, I think, but at the end, like for our really daily life, probably it will bring not so much values. So the sweet spot is somewhere in the middle, and there is a technique that's called 5 whys. This technique was developed by Sakichi Toyoda and used in the Toyota Corporation afterward. And basically, that's a way to define like a root cause relationship between the problems. So let's say you have this classical example. So the battery doesn't work in the car. So why doesn't it work? The generator is broken. Why is it broken? The belt is broken. Why the belt is broken? So it is old, so it wasn't replaced. Why wasn't it replaced? And you go deeper and deeper, and at the end you, like in 5 whys, you reach, okay, so the car wasn't maintained as it was advised by factory, let's say. So, and that's the initial reason. So you don't need to fix the problem somewhere in between, but you need to fix it like in an appropriate level. Why it's exactly 5 whys? Because it's just like 5 whys normally are enough to get to the right level. So it would be like 3 whys for you, but if you go like really high, at some point you will reach when you, let's say, blame the person and not the process. And one of the key things defined behind the concept of 5 whys is that people don't fail, only processes fail. So, and now I also like I learned the technique by Tom Gill, and I was like really amazed by it. So I tried like this exercise before, and I would to do it with you. So basically, just think for a moment about the most important thing of your life, like something that you really would like to achieve. The most important thing. Think about it like 10 seconds or something like this. And what kind of outcome would you like to get from this? So what exactly you would like to get from this, like when it's being achieved? Think about it a bit more. And now think, why do you want? So actually you are going in these different levels of priorities, and even if you in the very beginning thought that, well, like this is a very important thing in my life, but then you realized, okay, why I need it? Maybe I need it because of that. So you just like switch to the different level, and apparently the first like why wasn't so the first goal of your life maybe was not so important, but it was just like a key factor in order like to achieve the second goal. And asking this question more and more, you can really get to the like root cause here. And actually, yeah. So my main message after the talk, so for you, please don't buy like a bullshit nice phrases just because they sound nice. Like we need to deliver better results, or we need to reach an ultimate level of security, because it doesn't help. You really need to think about it, and if the thing what is requested from you by, let's say, your manager or your team, or in your private life, just think about, do you really understand it? Because at the end, even like during your communication with you and your manager, it could be the case that you truly believe on the thing, but you believe in a different ways. So, and you like a crawfish, swan and pike, just basically thinking that, well, pulling a cart is a really good idea, but you're doing it like in different ways, and it brings no benefit. So, and even like the ultimate questions or like ultimate answer to universe, life, and everything was 42. It's like quantified. It's not just like something like a bullshit. The purpose of life is to make positive difference. What the hell is positive difference? I mean, I have no idea. But 42 is pretty clear, right? So it's the answer. So you can measure it. So the purpose of life is 42. It's clear. So, and with these words, thank you. And if you have some questions, I'm ready to answer.
Well, then I have a question. This all sounds very reductionist, which basically means this is all good and fine for complicated problems. And I totally agree that we should do better than use bullshit phrases like make the site faster or better. However, I think you go overboard here when it comes to complex systems. And your example of love is, in my opinion, exactly that. Because these things, the core message here is that you cannot decompose them into parts. Because the sum, the whole system is more, or the whole system is more than the sum of its parts. And therefore, simple decomposition doesn't explain the thing good enough, because it's in the interactions between the systems where the system as a whole gets created. And that's something you lose by decomposition. So, to everyone in the audience, there's something valuable in here. Don't use bullshit phrases, but don't overdo it, because there's stuff that goes beyond this.
Yeah, so just to comment it, because I asked this question, Tom, as well. So, and there is a different approaches to define how this decomposed parts work together. And if you think about the interaction between different parts, it could be the case that some parts of love make sense only in combination together, only if they reach the specific level. But if they reach this level, then some other parts of the system can be affected by something. So, and actually, even if you use this language, there is a way to describe the complex relations between the different parts of the system. And of course, for our daily life, sometimes it could be too much, and just the easier way would be to think about decomposition for a natural or the easy enough things, let's say, and for such abstract things as a love. Yeah, you're right. So I mean that's totally true. But I think that the core message here is that it's not about just defining the solution, but about the communication. So, and if you talk to somebody and talking about, let's say, improving your work or something like this, you need to understand what other person means. Even if you have a totally different opinion, if you completely disagree that the person means by mentorship something, but you know that you speak different languages here, even the word is the same, actually what person means something different. And that's a kind of a core message, just to speak one language.
Yeah. One addition I'd like to make to the 5 whys that you suggested. In the similar vein to my first comment, with regards to 5 whys, there's a great paper already from the 80s or so, how complex systems fail. And I encourage anyone to read it, because it shows you that 5 whys, again, only gets you so far. if you actually have a basically predictable system where it makes sense to go back a couple of layers. But if you have complex systems, and we don't have to go to love to find complex systems, Holiday Check website is already complex enough to basically count as complex systems with all the hundreds of services we have. And these things fail in completely different ways, where 5Whys, yes, it gives you some information, but not the interesting information.
You share it in general?
I can share it in the channel. Basically, the idea is you have something over here that doesn't exactly work 100% right, but it's not a failure by itself. And you have 3 other things in a similar vein, and only when everything comes together, then you have failure. But you cannot say it failed because of that one or of that one, but it was the coming together of 3 imperfect things that make it a failure. Again, it's the interaction between stuff and not the things.
About the decomposition of complex stuff, isn't it better even to try it, just to try it and to talk about it? Because the example of law, I think, if you have no common base, it can help to decompose it and then get some task. Of course, you don't get the whole complex system on one base, but you get parts on one base, and I think this can help to understand each other.
If you go into it with the understanding, but maybe draw a line on the whiteboard here. So, if this is your complex thing, so here you have everything that's complex, and here you have stuff that's merely complicated. And basically, there's a continuum between the two. And I guess what's the most sensible thing is to have this in mind. So there is stuff where it doesn't make sense to decompose. There's other stuff where it totally makes sense. And you are somewhere in between those poles. And there are aspects of the stuff that you can decompose, and there it makes sense. But you have to understand how far you get here, and keep in mind that there are some things where it may be possible but not sensible to go down to concrete metrics. And yeah.
So it helps, but it's not the final result.
Yeah. It's not black or white.
Thank you for the presentation.